Folks, this is going to be a fun lesson. I'm excited to show you this one. It's called data validation, and what we do is we use a technique called data validation, which just means that I only allow certain things, certain values in a certain cell. I restrict what's allowed to be typed into the cell. But the nice thing is that in Google Sheets, they give us a drop-down menu of what those items are allowed to be. So I have this quick table here, just shows some data for different months for each department. And what we want to do is create a little formula that allows me to filter between A, B, and C, because I don't really want to see the whole big block of data every single time. And the way we're going to do it is to click into the cell that I want my menu to exist in. So, where do I want to put that menu? I'm going to right click and say data validation. It's also available in the data menu. We've got data validation. Cell range is just where I want it to go. So that was that G2 just there. I want a list from a range. There are some other options. You can type in the list manually yourself. You can just restrict it to numbers. You can restrict the cell to say it must be a text input, it must be a date, or even a custom formula. But let's take a look at list from a range. We'll click there and we're just going to select B2 to B10, click OK, and that then will give me the departments. Now I can say if someone types in something totally different from department A, they typed in Bob, then I can either restrict them to say show a warning about that, or I can reject that input and say no, it must be one of these three. So let's reject the input. You can also show some help text if you want, for example, say choose a department, but let's just leave that off for now. Click save, and there we go. You'll notice that it adds a little arrow into the corner of the cell, and when I click that, then it shows me the unique values from this range, and I can just then go and click one. So department A, and there we go. It's showing me now just the subsets of department A, B, or C. If you're wondering about how I got this to work, then I just pre-populated some filter formulas in here very quickly. So that's pretty cool. I can do it exactly the same thing with the double. So let's add data validation again. We'll do list from range, and we'll choose the month this time as the first one. Reject the input if it's not one of the months, and then we'll do a second one all the way down here, data validation, list from a range, and this time we'll do department stores again. Click OK, reject inputs, save. So now if I go and choose one of the months, let's choose January, and then let's choose department C. We should see just the data for that showing up, and there we go. So it's showing me that line there, which is the January line for department C. And again, that was achieved with a quick filter formula. Now don't worry about filters. I've got another lesson explaining all about filters and how they work. That essentially is how we use data validations to create dynamic tables, which we can then draw charts with and make those charts dynamic. You'll notice that if I then change to department A, those values change. If I go to March, you'll see those values updating and changing. So that's the beauty of using these data validations. We can make dynamic reports with them. Now let me show you one issue we have with that standard double data validation drop-downs that I just showed you. And I've got here a list of the Formula One motor racing world champions for the last 50 years or so, and which team they drove for, and then how many wins they had in that season. And what I would like to do is be able to select a driver and a team, and then see how many wins that driver had. The problem is when I go ahead and select a driver, let's just pick James Hunt here, then I still have the entire list of teams in this drop down, and he didn't obviously drive for Mercedes because he didn't win any races for Mercedes. Did he win for McLaren? Yeah, he won 6 for McLaren. What about for Alfa Romeo? No, he didn't drive for Alfa Romeo. And so what would be really nice is if this second drop down here was conditional. So when I chose a particular driver, then the only teams that would show up in this list would be the ones that driver drove for. And then it would make my choice much, much easier as a user, rather than having to guess and end up with all these zeros. So let's see how we do that. So the first thing is just to have the same driver drop down that we had before, and I'll show you what we can do with that. That's a nice trick, is we can just copy that cell straight in from above, and it brings that data validation with it. The next thing we need to do is to create a short list of teams that this particular driver drove for. And unfortunately, we can't put that directly into a formula in the data validation with the drop downs. So we have to create a quick little helper table here. But it's very simple. We'll just use the filter function again, and we will just filter the teams we want to filter. So we select them first, and we want to select just show the teams, filter on the teams when the driver, so we select the drivers next, is equal to the driver that we've picked there. And then I'll close the parentheses, and that will just give me the little list. And we can see there that James Hunt just drove for McLaren only. Now let's try Fangio. He drove for quite a few more. So you can see how when I select different people, that this is now starting to change. So that's the goal there. Now we just use that list here. What I might do actually quickly is just count unique from the teams here. In fact, what I might even do is decide to just wrap this one in unique as well, because I don't need two examples of Lotus, for example, there. So let's go back to Fangio. He still has all 4 there. Ayrton Senna, let's take a look. He drove from McLaren only. So instead of having all 3 copies, we just keep the 1 copy by using that unique wrapper on the filter. And I know that in total, there are no more than 16 unique teams. So I know that the maximum would be if someone drove once for every single team. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But you never know what sort of data you have, so you want to be able to still cover that scenario. But what we can do now is go to data validation. We're going to do a list from a range, and we'll click McLaren here, and we'll just drag down 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 there. And as I said, that will just give me space to include all of the different options if they all happen to come up. So we'll click OK, and we'll click Save. And now I should just see McLaren. There we go. So Ayrton Senna had 21 victories for McLaren in total across his career. And if we look at Fangio, then here's the 4 choices I have. So he drove for Mercedes, for example. One thing I can't change is if I was to pick a different driver and they didn't drive for Mercedes, you'll see that it gives me this invalid range because that isn't a valid option for Jackie Stewart's. So I have to first click down, and then I can choose the one of the teams that he drove for. But unfortunately, I can't do anything about that. First of all, showing me the wrong input there until you've gone and selected something else. So that's how we do the conditional, the drop-down menus, where we make the second one conditional upon the choice of the first. We just use a quick filter to just give us the unique list of options for the second drop-down. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you, and that is how do we use data validation to make sure we don't include, for example, any duplicates in when we're entering new data into our spreadsheets, because really that's what data validation actually is. We just happen to use the drop-down menus. It's an extremely useful part of data validation for our dashboards and whatnot, but the actual point of data validation is to validate data when it's inputted into your spreadsheet. So if I want to now enter a new ID in this column here, in this cell here rather, what do I want to make sure? I want to make sure it's not contained in any of these. And one way I could do that would be to say equals count if, and we're going to check this range, and we're going to check whatever I put into this cell and just count it. And I want to make sure that that equals 0, because if I put in a number that's already here, the count if will be 1. So let's make sure it's just a 0. So if I was to put in that employee ID 4 again, then it will give me a false here. Whereas if I put in 10, it's going to give me a true. So that is the sort of validation I'm talking about. And all I need to do now is to make sure I lock it to a 2. And then if I was to drag this down, then now this just takes a look at the next cell, goes up to A11 now, and then it checks my input in 12. So that's perfect. So for example, if I try to enter 10 again, it's going to give me a false here. So how do I now translate that into an actual data validation? Well, what we can do is just grab this formula. So let's copy that formula, and let's right click here on the cell we want. We'll do data validation, and we'll put in that formula. So equals count if. Very important we have that $sign in front of the 2 to lock the top of the range there. So we're always counting from the very first one. And we'll reject an input, and we'll say that, actually we need to first change that to custom formula first of all. And we want to show a validation text that, and we'll reject any inputs that don't work. So actually it's just lost that formula there, so we'll just put that back in. So equals count if A locked to the number 2 up to 10, and A11 is the one we're going to check. We'll click save, and now I have that data validation in here. So if I try 4, it's not going to let me do it. It says duplicate entity ID entered, please try again. Let's try number 10, and it works this time. And the nice thing is, again, I can just copy this down. So first of all, let's delete the value so it's not copied down, but we'll copy that cell now all the way down to say 30, and that all now has data validation in. So if I was to try 10 again, it says problem. You need to enter, you've entered a duplicate. So we can try 11, we try 12, 12 again, problem. So that's using the sort of standard data validation method, and that can be useful for making sure your sheet only permits the types of inputs that you want. So that's data validation. Thanks, folks.